When we create art
Yeah.
and share that art publicly, we lose a level of ownership, not from an intellectual property standpoint, but from I'm going to take your art and filter it through my lens, through my experiences, through my baggage, through my whatever, right?
I wish y'all cared about improving people's human conditions the way you care about saving people's souls and shaming people when you think that their soul isn't going to be saved and thinking that that's going to lead them to faith in some way, right?
Hey everyone, welcome to The Wait and the Wonder. I'm Jason Herndon, a licensed psychologist.
And I am Philicia Ross. I am a licensed clinical social worker. And this is our What's Happening segment where we take what the internet is buzzing about in media, pop culture, movies, etc., and we will hold it up to a more nuanced and therapeutic light. And same as always, quick and with love, we are licensed clinicians, but we are not your licensed clinicians or mental health professionals. This is simply our perspective, not therapy or advice. If you do need support, personalized support, please reach out to a provider that you trust. All right. So
All right.
I know that we have a theme today.
Yes.
Yes. Everything that we are circling today in some of the topics is circling one big question. Really, what does it take to hold someone accountable? What does it mean to hold somebody accountable? What does it mean to cancel someone? And I know if I were to kick us off, I wonder if you can really hold somebody accountable with words alone when you were never
Mm.
in community with them in the first place.
Whew, that's a great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
That's a great
Yeah.
question. Okay, let's keep that front of mind. Why don't you jump
Yeah.
in to the first?
Yes. So we are going to get through as many topics as we can. Last time we timed ourselves and we realized, no, it's not going to work out for us. No.
It's not going to happen.
So what we are going to do is we're going to take 25 to 30 minutes and then we're just going to see how many topics we can get through, and that is how we're going to kind of do this little pressure cooker
I like that.
of a segment, okay? All right. So, the first topic that we have up is Dominique Morgan and the Okra Project kerfuffle,
Yeah.
contention. Yeah. So, I don't know if you know too much about Dominique Morgan.
I have not heard about this at all. So yeah, walk me through it.
Yeah, so Dominique Morgan is a trans activist. She's known on TikTok and social media, and she does a lot for the girls and the dolls. I love
Mhm.
her very, very much. I really enjoy her takes. And so I know recently there was this announcement from her that she was going to go to jail for about, I think, 20 to 30 days. And it rocked the internet, right? A bit, especially people who support her because they're like, what's going on? And it came to light that she was the former director of what is known, I think it's a nonprofit that still exists, called the Okra Project. This was based in New York. It's a mutual aid for Black trans folks. And she's accused of taking around like a significant amount of money. I want to say it's around $100,000 from a bail fund that was meant for incarcerated Black trans people. So a lot of folks are like, how are you taking from your own people? Like, you read People for Filth about power dynamics and things like that. So when you were in a place of power, you stole from your own people. And like, it was just a big storm. And, I think that I think it's okay for people to ask for accountability. I didn't care for some of the transphobia that came out as a result. And I think before this, I think it was Dominique and T.S. Madison had been stalked by this person, but called the DL Whisperer, who had actually said that he wanted to harm them. So it's been a lot. And if you
Yeah.
know anything about LGBTQ, especially Black trans folk, they have a life expectancy as of 2020, from what I remember, of, I want to say 30 to 35. However, their life expectancy is not that long
Hmm.
compared to those of us who are cis, het, or even cis and queer, right? So it's been really unfortunate. So here's what I know. I know that she pled guilty, and I think she pled guilty or she pled out to a specific aspect of it. And so then she went and did her 30 days at Rikers. She then came home, and
Hmm.
I think she may be looking at some probation and a fine. There's no restitution to come from that. I don't believe that
Okay.
she's going to do any more jail time. So she did sit down for an interview within a few days of getting out. And I think this is where the layers come in. So in the interview, she says she only pled to one charge and that the rest of the charges got dropped. I think some people are saying that's not what the record says. I know some of the news coverage, and there was even a statement from the Okra Project, which they did recant from what I remember seeing, that she actually falsified records. So there's just a lot of kind of back and forth here.
Yeah.
But the part that I'm kind of sitting with really is around like, what does it mean to be accountable to your community that you say you are an activist for? What does it mean to be a part of a broken system? Because if you've ever worked for nonprofits, you know how sometimes nonprofits can get down.
Hmm.
And so she says that the real villain is the fiscal sponsor who took a very significant cut and lost a lot of money, that there was no oversight at that organization, there was no real bank account, and that she actually was scapegoated. I think that was the last thing that I read, that she was scapegoated. And so she's taking the fall for something that she actually didn't do. And, I think we understand that there could be real organizations, especially nonprofit organizations, and I can hold that are not doing what they need to do. I think the values question sitting underneath it for me is that at the end of the day, there are people in real need on the other side of this,
Yeah.
right? Who did not get their need met. So then I ask, like, did the practice match the value of community care? Like, we can't explain away that there was actually harm here. And I do think that Dominique has said that she has regrets. She wishes she would do things differently. And she feels that remorse would mean that she is agreeing to the villain that they want her to be in this narrative. And I do want to be very careful and human here because
Hmm.
she is a Black trans woman. And we named earlier that at this point she has already survived. I think she was in prison before. She already survived almost a decade in prison, who calls incarceration her version of death. I think that trauma is very real and I want to hold that. And I think trauma can explain behavior. Like, this is my therapeutic brain coming on now. It's still not a permission slip for behavior, though, right? I
Absolutely.
think both of these are true at the very same time. So then
Mhm.
the question is, what does accountability look like here?
Yeah. So first, thank you for sharing all that with me.
Hmm.
Sounds like quite the mess.
It is
I
quite the
think that
mess.
what really stands out to me, and this
Mm,
is, I think, connected to this idea of accountability, is this
mhm,
statement that she made, maybe you made, around like that showing remorse would then be stepping into this villain role, right? Or
mm,
acknowledging, accepting, right, the
mhm,
role that they're attempting to cast her as.
mhm, mhm,
And I have questions about that, right? I wonder, right?
mm.
I think, again, the nuance dies in the extremes, right?
Yes, it does.
So if in her frame, it's either zero remorse and innocent or 100% remorse and guilty, then I think that
Mhm,
whatever nuance exists in
mhm,
there falls apart, right?
mhm.
So I do think that there is space to feel remorseful for how things went down
Yeah,
for the people who are harmed,
yeah.
right? Because I think, as you pointed out, again, within this, frame of extremes, right, I can't acknowledge any remorse because then that would be acknowledging some kind of wrongdoing. I don't think I did anything wrong.
Mhm.
Well, then that also leaves the people who were harmed kind of high and dry,
High and dry. Yeah.
right?
Who
And so,
needed the
yeah,
funds
that's
for
right,
their
and I
yeah.
can't it sounds like they're not gonna get those funds, but at least not from this pot of money, but, I think even if they aren't going to get the funds, they might appreciate some acknowledgement, right? That whatever went down
Yeah, whether
harmed
it's from her
us.
or the Okra
Yeah.
Project, like, just as sorry to cut you off, but just as
Mhm.
you guys are a part of the same community, I
Yeah,
think to say, like, at the end of the day, people are not getting what they need.
that's
Yeah.
right. So I think from an accountability place, it's interesting because the other idea is when you are a member of a community that is historically marginalized and needs, right? Like this mutual aid fund exists for a reason,
Period, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
She is also a member of the community that necessitated the creation of this mutual aid fund.
Uh,
And so it leaves me to wonder, like, how much mutual aid did she actually need in her life? And I don't know what the
uh,
answer to that question is,
That's a great
right?
question.
I think that I'm willing to assume that some of it is the answer. She needed some of the mutual aid,
Mhm,
right? To
uh,
keep her life going, to remain the advocate. right? An activist that people like and respect and appreciate and find
Mhm,
solace, right?
mhm.
And recognition and validation. And I think it's probably less than $100,000, right? There is perhaps a sense of violated fairness, right? Around like how do we dole out the
Yeah,
mutual aid in a way that feels equitable? Fair is probably
yeah,
not the right word, but equitable, right?
for
And to
that,
what extent
yeah.
does it feel equitable that you were dipping into funds that maybe you did actually need, but in a way that didn't have the same level of like oversight or constraint that
Mhm.
other
And even if
people who maybe needed the mutual aid would have received?
right, and even if you didn't know what the funds were particularly for or you weren't aware at all, there's still a need not being met from my perspective, and if your
Totally.
community has values that are abolitionist, anti-carceral, harm is happening inside of this house,
Yeah.
and then there's no internal way to hold it. I think
Yeah.
that that's also where I kinda come in from that point of view, because then now we're defaulting to rejecting values. And I can understand the nuance of like, I still am going to be doing this work. I still have things that I want to build. I don't want this hanging over my head, especially if I don't feel like I did anything wrong.
Sure.
And
Hmm.
I absolutely get that. And also, if a community has no muscle for accountability, then punishment becomes the only tool left in the drawer to use,
It's true. Yeah.
right?
It's true.
And I do think that there's some consequence. Yes, right? I don't know if there has been a lot of repair to this rupture. And I think that is the overall take for me is if you are a part of a community, whatever that community is, do you have the muscle? Have you built the muscle for accountability inside of that community?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the overview of
Yeah.
a lot of our topics today. And I
Absolutely.
think what we'll find is a lot of folks do not have not built the container or have built the muscle for accountability.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's right. That was a good one. Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so next topic, Kevin Hart had a roast like a few weeks ago.
Uh huh.
If you haven't seen it by now, I guess you could watch it. Tony Hinchcliffe did a George Floyd bit, plus lynching jokes. It went exactly the way you think. I mean, I think Hart's response to me wasn't surprising. It was just basically like, I didn't say it. I think, outside of those jokes, he had the best roast, which I also didn't agree with because to me, I did go back because I wanted to see the full context of
Hmm.
everything to understand. And
Yeah.
anyway, Cheryl Underwood, love you. Thank you for
Hmm.
doing a great roast. And then I know Joe Rogan jumped in, calling the comedians who spoke up against it traitors. And here's where I land on it. If we go back to Tom Brady's roast, which I don't know if you saw Tom Brady's roast,
I didn't.
it was funny to me to an extent, but I'm also like,
Hmm.
I guess he made it very clear, right, that certain people were off limits, right, and
Yeah.
certain things were
Yeah.
off limits. And I feel like for Kevin Hart, who is basically in Netflix pocket I mean, he has a lot of money, so like I don't know. I've never produced a show. Would love to though. Like right at one point, I would love to. I would love to. I would
Any
love to get a lot
directors
of
listening, give us a
any right.
call.
Love to get my ideas out there because I got some ideas. But you built this room, you hosted it, you produced it, you set the table. So there's a difference between writing the one joke and then being the person who is stewarding the whole space where the joke gets
Yeah.
told. And that's diffusion of responsibility. You're spreading it so thin that nobody's actually holding any of it,
Yeah.
right? So this idea of, well, it's a roast, so you should know that anything goes. That then becomes a norms argument. And what I actually think it is honestly, see, and I'm also someone who thinks I everything to me is political. So therefore, and race is political. So
Yeah.
we are now talking about race. If we're going by this norms argument, right? Norms tell you what's allowed in a room. And if you are a black man who does not align with your community, which personally, I don't think Kevin Hart aligns with the black community. I think he has chosen capitalism over the black community. And we've seen that time and time and time and time again. I also don't expect a lot of moral high ground from someone who had things to say about the LGBTQ community in relation to his own children, the ways that he has done infidelity over and over again. Just there's a lot of behaviors that Kevin Hart has done that shows me like, well, yeah, like you can be a flawed human. And also, I don't necessarily think and see you as a person for all black people.
Hmm.
Right. So I don't consider him a part of the community because you don't align yourself with the community. You align yourself with your bottom line, and your bottom line is money. So I was not offended to hear the joke because as soon as I saw Tony Hinchcliffe, I was like, oh, well then I already know what this is going to be. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was kind of my reaction is that so for those who might not remember, Tony Hinchcliffe also made a lot of like negative waves. He attended I think it was the RNC convention a couple years ago
Yes.
and told a joke about Puerto Rico being like basically I think like an island of floating trash or something like that.
Yeah.
And this was leading up, I think, to the presidential election,
It was. Yeah.
and there were just a lot of sound
Yeah.
bites and stuff made, right, of that. And
Yeah.
so I think in some ways he was not particularly repentant, right, or remorseful in
No.
my
These.
recollection for that.
No.
I think his perspective seems to be that, and I've heard Kevin Hart say this, I've heard a lot of other comedians say, right,
Mhm.
nothing should be off limits in comedy. And so I hear that, and I don't even entirely disagree with that. I have
Mhm.
what feel like a variety of like competing ideas about comedy. One of
Mhm.
them is you can get away with almost anything if it is funny,
Yeah.
right? And so I think a part of what doesn't work is like just saying stuff that is shocking and offensive
And thinking that it's
is,
funny.
yeah, in and of itself is not comedy.
That's not comedy to
Yeah,
me.
right. Like
Yeah.
that's not inherently funny. It's
Yeah.
surprising, it's
Yeah.
unexpected,
Yeah.
right? But it's not inherently funny. And I think that
Mhm.
for my personal take on like what kind of comedy I like, that's not the kind of comedy I like. I like
Mm.
comedy that's like actual jokes. Go figure.
Actually has a punchline.
Yeah, that has like a real
Yeah.
joke in it.
And
You
I don't
know,
think Kevin Hart has ever seen a punchline. So,
I think
sorry.
when we get to this place of accountability, though,
Yeah.
again, it's like this is where the nuance dies, right? Which is I can't
Mhm.
take accountability for anything because I wasn't responsible for that thing over there,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Versus there are actually several levels of accountability that are
Mm.
happening here, right? Should
Mm.
he be held responsible for what another person let come out of their mouth? No, I don't know that he should,
Yeah.
right? Could he be held responsible or take some level of accountability for facilitating a space and a stage where like
That
that person
allows
had
that.
the opportunity to do that? Maybe. In fact,
Yeah.
probably. I would personally say yes,
Mhm.
right? Somebody on his team invited him, right, to come. I imagine he had some level of approval,
Especially as an
right?
executive producer on your own roast.
Right.
Like it's
And again, like I didn't
yeah.
label you the executive producer, right? Like you
Right.
told us that that's what you were. And so like, are you a
Yeah.
boss or not? Right. And so I do think that there is this sort of interesting dichotomy sometimes
Yeah.
what we see with people. It's like, well, that wasn't really me. It's like you told me you were the boss. Right. So are you the boss or are you not the boss? Because
Like
sometimes you say I'm the boss and I should get all the credit for all the positive stuff. But
mhm.
when it's time to take credit for the negative stuff, it's like, well, that was really somebody else when you think about it. And
Yeah,
it's like,
like I didn't
well, wait,
really I'm looking up making sure he was an executive producer before I have to and if he wasn't, I'll take it back. But
I won't take
yeah,
it back.
he was. Yeah, he was the executive
Mhm.
producer. So
Yeah,
you're right. He was the boss. And I agree with you. I think that like I understand why people are upset. And
sure.
I do think that there are some things from my perspective is like this person has told you who they are over and over and over again with their actions.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
best thing to me that Kevin Hart has done in the last decade was the competition show. And I liked it because I didn't have to see Kevin Hart do any jokes.
I don't even know what you're talking about, but I believe
It's
that.
called Funny AF. I'm like, I liked
Oh,
it
got
because
it.
I
Yeah,
got
yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
I
yeah.
got
I
to
know what.
see,
Yeah.
like, I think do that. Like,
Hmm.
give people a platform. I love that. Right. Did I watch Jumanji? Maybe I did, but I didn't. I think
I
he
did
does.
not.
You
I
didn't?
don't think.
I watched it. I do like Jack Black. So for me, I'm just like, and to me, there are some people who I think you hit this nail on the head. Like when you think of comedy and when we're thinking about who we want to hold accountable, again, to me, you cannot hold someone accountable if they're not in community with you. So it was not shocking to me that Kevin Hart was just like, I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
like, what do you want me to do? You know?
Yeah.
And I think when you have this idea of loyalty being used as a wall around accountability, then you kind of make sure that you can never hold anybody accountable,
Yeah.
right? And you're just not someone who wants to be held accountable.
Hmm.
Accountable. Like at the end of the day, people are still going to go watch Kevin Hart's movies. They are still going to see him in commercials. He is still going to be chosen to host. I think when we get to this whole like he's canceled, like and I know we'll talk about that more in a bit, probably towards the end of our topics. But like when I think about cancel culture and in my mind, I'm kind of like, well, you can't truly cancel anybody. You can decide like I think the only time that we do that is when we come together and say, like, this no longer serves us as a community. And because Black folk one are not a monolith, we now have elitism, we now have misogynoir, we have like there's all these things that are separating our community in these very unfortunate but also intricate ways, they're not necessarily ever going to be canceled unless
Yeah.
they are held accountable to, I guess, a bigger system. And to me, lately, what we've seen that in is the law, or
Yeah.
seen that with is the law, right? When I think of R. Kelly and Diddy
Yeah.
and right, like but in terms of just social cancellation. Now, one
Yeah.
thing I will say is the podcasters from Shits and Gigs definitely fumbled with Black women, and then I never saw them again. Actually, I
Oh, they're around. I see them.
oh, you do?
Well, I see them on
So
the internet. It's not like they come to my house, but like
I
I
was
said
like,
that like, oh yeah, they in the other room. That's not what I mean.
no,
Yeah, I see
I
them come
just
up on the internet. Yeah.
I just never saw them again. I was just like,
Hmm.
"Oh, okay." And then my partner told me that they were still around. He's like, "Oh yeah, like their videos still pop up for me." I'm like, and I think that's for me cancellate. Like once I decide I don't
Hmm.
really want you to be a part of my world anymore, then you're not. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's an important point. Well, first and foremost, we've talked about this off camera a bunch of times. I don't believe the cancel culture is real.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but to the extent that it is an individual thing, right? There
Mhm.
are a lot of things that go into like canceling a person in any like meaningful way that
Yeah.
most average people do not have the power to implement.
Yeah.
Right. Yell on the internet all you want, but like yelling on the internet has never cost anybody their job. Right. Yelling on the internet might scare corporations, and
Yeah.
corporations might make the choice to say, like, I don't want the heat to be associated with me. And so we're going to get rid of you. But that's still not our decision.
Yeah.
I don't really think it's for us to take credit for that. Like, we got
Mhm.
whoever fired, right? It's like, I don't actually think that we did. I
Yeah,
think
I
the
think yeah.
accountability thing is, for me, really interesting, right? In the sense that, like, it's hard to hold people accountable who you are not in relationship with and or don't
Yeah.
have any leverage over. You could potentially hold a politician accountable, even though you're
Yep.
not in a relationship with them, because I mean, at least for now, we can vote, right?
At least for
Them
now.
into office or out of office or that type
Yeah.
of thing, right? With stars, comedians, musicians, actors, whoever, right? We don't particularly have any real leverage, right? We as
Yeah.
a society could come together and say, we're not supporting your shows or your movies or your whatever anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that might have an impact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, we don't have any leverage over Kevin Hart. And what Kevin Hart has demonstrated repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again is that he is in fact not swayed by the public's opinion of him, at least not this public's opinion of him.
Yeah, I was gonna say particularly he's not swayed by the Black community's opinion of him.
Right.
Yeah,
And
he's
so
not.
like I think you have to go in eyes open, right? Which is that like sometimes what that will mean, not even all the time, sometimes what that will mean is he
Mhm.
is going to do something or let something be done,
Mhm.
right? That is offensive or harmful or upsetting, right? And that
Yeah.
we are not the people who are able to hold him accountable in that way. If there's somebody in his camp who he's listening to, great, maybe, right?
Mhm.
I also feel like that's not how camps work, right? That more often than not, it's like, I'm wealthy and you're a yes person,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Because being close to power and being close to wealth is all some of us really want,
Yeah.
right? And we're not going to do anything to jeopardize that, right? So if what you need to hear me say is, sounds great, Philicia, you to Bob, right? Then that's what I will say.
Yep. And then if you need to hear me say, "Okay, I'm sorry," and
Hmm.
knowing that you're not actually gonna back that up with any action, then that's also gonna work too,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that brings us into the next topic, which is summer house.
Yeah. I'll take
Okay.
this one. This
Yes,
summary is
you
for
do know
folks.
a little bit about this. Okay, good, 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 good.
Welcome. I understand a little bit about pop culture. I've heard about the Kevin Hart thing too. But anyway, this summary is for people who don't know anything about Summer House. I imagine that if you watch Summer House even a little bit, which I did not, you will find this summary lacking.
Pretty
So,
accurate.
yeah, right. So, if you know anything about it, I'm not going to do that well. But if you've never heard of it, I'm your guy,
You're
right?
yes, you got
Yes.
this. You got
So,
this.
Summer House is not basically, Summer House is a reality show
Mhm.
and it includes all of these very young people. As I understand it, this year there are more people of color in the cast.
I
I
think this
think
is
that
the
there
most
are
people of color that they've had on the
3
cast.
that I
Yes.
have seen,
Yes.
but historically there was 1 person of color in the cast, and
1 to 2.
Sierra.
Yeah, I don't know why they always forget about Gabby. Gabby was a Black woman, she was a part of the cast, y'all. Y'all forget about her all the time.
I sure do. Forget would imply I knew to begin with, which I didn't. And so what has happened is
Uh-huh.
that, Sierra was dating West with a
Yeah.
T.
Back in season 8, she was dating West.
They were dating, they broke up, What came to light more recently is that West then started dating.
You want me to help you out?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. So
I said
Kyle
I
and
don't know nothing about the show.
So Kyle and Amanda have been together pretty much since season 1, right? So for the last 15 years, right? Because they knew each other before the show came. So for the last, I think, 10, 15 years, they have been together. They got married
Right. I was going to say
and
they got married because I heard they
they
got
did
divorced.
they did get married.
Okay.
And they didn't announce a divorce. They announced a separation in January that is going to lead to a divorce. And so during this most recent season of Summer House, before all of the show aired, it came out that Amanda and West began a relationship, and that came out in
Yes.
March. Right? The diabolical thing about this is that Sierra and West had started to rekindle. They said it was just a friendship. However, I do think that they were still kind of hooking up. When the rumors came out, Amanda and West both lied to Sierra and Kyle. Sierra asked Amanda back in, I think, January, February, is there any truth to the rumors? Please just tell me now. Amanda said, no, he's just my friend. Also, while Wes and Amanda were doing their thing, he also had a whole girlfriend while he was on Summer
Yeah.
House.
He's
and acting
rekindling
like
with
he,
everybody, is what it sounds like.
yeah, and acting like he was single on Summer House. Who he dropped right before going public with Amanda. So
Okay,
it's a whole
great.
thing.
That's a way more cogent summary that I could have offered. We would
Yeah.
have gotten there, I think, but
We've gotten there. So
slowly.
now that
Yeah.
is the yes. So go ahead and take it
I
away.
think, again, from this space of accountability that it brings up for me
Mhm.
is really this idea of, is anyone really ever off limits? And how are we deciding that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And apparently there was a conversation that between West and Sierra that they would never date anyone else from the cast. So I guess that is now out the window. So
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. I mean, I think what stands out to me about this idea is how much of the way we interact with one another
mm-hmm.
is silent agreement, right? And so I can't remember whether I talked about the difference between rules and boundaries on the show before, but let's say this is your first episode. Welcome. The difference between a rule and a boundary is rules are created in an attempt to govern other people's behavior, right? And our
That's a great
behavior,
definition. Yep. Mm-hmm.
right? Boundaries are really about how I will respond to your behavior, right? You don't need to do anything for me to implement my boundaries,
Yep.
right? Rules are only as useful as long as everyone agrees to them,
Hear that? Say
right?
again.
Rules are only as useful as long as everyone agrees to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Monogamy in many relationships is a rule, right?
Mm.
But that only works as a rule, right? Nothing stops someone from cheating on you, right?
Yeah.
When they decide, I don't want to agree that we are exclusive or monogamous or whatever anymore, that's that.
They they don't.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can implement your boundary and leave or go to therapy or talk to them or get upset or whatever it is that you decide to do in response to that
Mm-hmm.
behavior. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the rule of we don't date friends, girl code, bro code, whatever silly thing we're wrapping these ideas in,
Mm.
right? Like is useless,
Yeah.
is useless. And so
Yeah.
then when we're attempting to hold one another accountable, it can be
Mm-hmm.
really challenging because we're not clearly on the same page and we weren't clearly on the same page, right? This isn't to suggest that no one can ever do anything wrong.
Yeah.
I think that it is generally accepted in society that like we don't date each other's exes, right? But this is also not the first story we've ever heard about this. So I think we're dating each other's exes commonly enough that none of us are like, like I've literally never heard
Yeah.
of a person dating someone else's ex. Who
And
would do such a thing?
and the people who are being like willfully obtuse about this,
Mhm.
I do not think Sierra really cares about Wes because I think at the core she knows who he is as a person.
Yeah.
What I think is the frustrating part is that Amanda has watched Sierra go through a lot of harm as a result of Wes and watched her actually have to get back to this place of trusting him again, knowing that you guys are having this happening in the background. Whether Amanda says that that's true or not, at this point, you've lost all credibility because you've been lying for several months. And now you want people to believe your version of events and they
Yeah.
can't. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think to take it back to this idea too of like how do you hold someone accountable who you're not in community with,
Yeah.
right? I think the reason I wanted to talk about this, and as ironic as it is that Philicia had to give the whole summary, I wanted to talk about this one because it was all in my Instagram feed, right? It was all I could see,
Me too.
right? But what stood out to me really about this is that we are not engaged in a process of
No.
us as viewers, however you want to define that,
Yeah.
right, of the show holding any of these people accountable,
Because you
right?
can't.
We are engaged in a
Yeah.
process of watching people who are actually in relationship and in community with each other
Yep.
attempt, albeit unsuccessfully, to hold one another
Yeah.
accountable for their behavior, right? This
Yep.
is truly not about us,
It's not. It's
right?
not.
We are just
And
watching the drama unfold, and it is
unfold in front of our
dramatic.
eyes.
Sierra read these people for filth, complete filth, and it was
Sierra
amazing
apparently
to
is from
watch.
Atlanta, and I was like, "Yeah,
She
yeah,
was
you ate
ready.
that. You were ready." Okay?
She
If
was
she ever
ready.
goes on The
Yeah.
Housewives, would love that for her
I would, yeah,
because
we'd love to
you're
see it.
ready.
Yeah. But I think that that's really the take home for me here, right? Is again,
Mm,
right? We are not in relationship, right? In
mm,
community with these people. And
mhm.
so I don't have anything to say, right? To them specifically or
Yeah.
how they should or should. They don't owe me anything, right? I'm not owed an apology as a viewer or anything else, right?
Yeah.
Like this is between them. I just get to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, and I think the real thing is us as the audience acting like we get a vote in who owes who an apology when we're not in that house. We see segments and edits, right? And even I think Andy as the host having to remind people, right? Like these are real people. Like they're going through real things.
Mhm.
And I think that's the parasocial trap, right? Because we
Yeah.
then end up as the audience judging relationships that we are not actually in or a part of. And I am going to say more about race because we are going to talk about pride in a bit, but the way that race shows up specifically in this dynamic, I'm going to hold off on that on
Yeah.
purpose because I know we're going to come right back to it when we get to talking about pride, but sit tight and I promise you I'm going to unpack all the things.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next quick one I hope is quick.
We're at 37
That's
minutes.
gonna right. Hope it's quick. Tie the theme up is the creator of Gachiakuta, the mangaka of Gachiakuta, Kei Urana. Gachiakuta, for people who don't know, is an anime that is literally about a discarded underclass, about who gets thrown away, and a largely Western fan base has spent months like coming for her over just these minute things. And finally, she is off social media, which is really unfortunate. There was someone who reposted a cosplay and they used for of Jabber and they
Yeah.
used leeks to stand in for the character's locks and people called it racist. And she laughed at it because it actually was kind of funny. But then people were like, but it's racist because why are you using leeks as locks? And in my mind, I was like, well, anyway. So let me say this because I do think there is something that happens for Western fan base of anime that really irritates me. Let's remember that Japan is a homogeneous society. I know that it's 2026. I know that cultural sensitivity is a thing. I also know that people can look things up, but to expect a Japanese creator to have an American understanding of race is very interesting to me. To say that she's not accountable and because she has made black characters that are not a caricature of black Americans is a beautiful thing. Like we don't get representation oftentimes when we see anime. I know usually they preserve a very European Western standard in anime. And so I appreciate that this mangaka was like, no, like I'm going to give you black characters that are essential to the story. Um, and I do think that we just don't give in this art form that is not Western. It doesn't come from us. We didn't create it, right? It is their culture. Like that deserves some humility because accountability does have a face and a relationship. And when you become a mob, now you just have a target. And I just
Mhm.
think that I just wish we could just calm down a bit and like see the nuance in the fact of like she has offered her work to us, right? And to be quite honest, she didn't have to. And so for us to take this Western gaze towards someone who did not necessarily grow up here, is not a part of our culture or the American culture in that way, and expect her to just know everything because she decided to be inclusive with her character design. I think everyone, it's just a lot.
Yeah, my thoughts here are quick, which is that I think that I am a firm believer in the idea that when we create art
Yeah.
and share that art publicly, we lose a level of ownership. Not from an intellectual property standpoint,
Yeah.
right? But from I'm going to take your art and filter it through my lens, through my experiences, through my baggage, through my whatever, right? And it will become something in my mind that
Mm,
is uniquely mine, right?
that's a really good
That's,
point.
I think, a good and normal process.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't even know that it matters whether it's good or not. I think it's an
No, that's,
unavoidable process of
yeah,
the
I think it
sharing of
is.
art,
Yeah.
right? I think that on a good day, there are kind of three versions of a book. There's the book you wanted to write, the
Mhm.
book I wanted to read, and like kind of
And
wherever we meet in the middle. When we don't like
yeah.
books, sometimes it's because it's like, I wanted to read a book about dragons. And then the author has to be like, I don't give a damn. I wanted to write a book about horses. Right.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry you don't like my horse book. Go write your own dragon book if that's what you want. Right.
Mhm.
I think then it is one thing to have in your head. I've come to love the idea of mind canon. Right. So it's like in my
Mm.
mind, these characters
Mhm.
are in a relationship. In my mind, this person is really like this when they're off the page, right? Or off
Yeah.
screen or off whatever, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, like this is how this universe exists for
Mm.
me, right? That's perfectly fine. We do not need to get to a point where we are arguing with the actual creator about
Yeah.
their own ideas and their own intentions. That's cuckoo bananas.
I think, could there be a real conversation about that repost, about how the locks were presented, about cultural sensitivity? Yes. And majority of folks didn't do that.
Correct.
Right? There was
Mhm.
no sensitivity in coming to the mangaka around like, hey, like this is why this is offensive to your American audience, especially Black American audiences. There was, you should know because you wrote Black characters. Let me tell
Mhm.
you who also wrote a whole Black anime and knew nothing about Black American culture. The mangaka for Afro Samurai knew nothing outside of the fact that he liked hip hop and thought
Yeah.
Black is cool. And so he wrote Afro Samurai. Did he do a
Yeah.
deep dive? Are you guys going to come for him too? It is
Probably.
important, probably now, I guess,
Yeah.
that a
Right.
genuine
Yeah.
a genuine critique can exist, but chasing somebody off of the internet is not accountability. That's not
No.
accountability, that's a mob. So when you are putting American racial frames on a creator from a different culture and of a different race entirely, like give some humility. And
Mhm.
also know that you did not hold her accountable. Like
Mhm.
it's just, hey, nothing I do is right. I'm gone. Right? That's how kind of I took it as. Like nothing I do is right, so I'm gone. Because
Yeah.
it's now interrupting how people are engaging with what my intention was, which just was to share just a beautiful art form and a beautiful story.
Cultural criticism has existed for a long time.
Mm,
I think what is unique about the time that we live in now is that we have so much more access to the people who are creating art and
mhm.
culture, right?
Yeah.
And so, what would at one time have been an analysis that doesn't involve her directly
Yeah.
of like her ideas about America and race and blah, 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 right? Now is being taken by people who also don't have the skills to pay the bills, right? For this level of analysis directly to her
Mm.
and like, oh, well, we need to talk about how you think about this. Like you are underqualified most of the time to have that conversation.
So that also had me thinking about Caitlin Clark as well in this walkout with Morgan Wallen and people coming for her while, there are also male athletes that did the same thing but caught nothing. And I think at the end of the day, Jamel Hill said it best, like nobody passes a purity test. And if I drive that even home further, right? Like, and I'm not a fan of Caitlin Clark. I do think the behavior is annoying. I think the ignorance and this her being now the face of the WNBA, like there's a lot happening in the WNBA that we could probably even have a whole episode about, but I don't watch enough of it to do so. So yeah.
Mm-mm.
But what I will say is like I think accountability has a face and a relationship, right? And I think when we are looking at people like Caitlin Clark, Kevin Hart, the folks of Summer House, the mangaka of Gachiakuta, every one of them comes back to what I think I said at the top. Like, you cannot hold someone truly accountable with words alone when you are not in community with them. There could be consequences. Sure, you can try to shame them, right? And also, like, can you shame people who don't truly care about you? I don't know. But accountability that actually changes someone, that to me takes a relationship and it takes repair. And the
Mhm.
internet does not have either one. Right. All right. So ultimately, please, if you've been here the whole time, thanks. Love that for us. And I hope you come visit us again. Please, if you have any thoughts, please leave a comment below. Please
Mhm.
subscribe. Make sure that you don't miss notification. Shout out to our 30 subscribers. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. You can find us on IG at The Wait and the Wonder. Right?
Yep.
Is that our IG name? You can find us
Mhm.
on TikTok at, I think it's Wait and Wonder. And you can also find me at By Felicia, Village of Sound Mind on Instagram. And you can also find me on Substack at Liberation Letters. And where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jason L. Herndon, and I also write at somemen.substack.com. And you can find us, the podcast, also on YouTube at Wait and Wonder Podcast. All
Which
links
you
are
are
in the
watching.
description.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Everything is in the description, as Jason said. Sorry, I cut him off. My bad. I'm excitable.
No problem.
How do we end this out? Okay, until next time, hold the wait
And find the wonder.